But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to Naomi. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely that even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. We give God thanks for these holy scriptures. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. It's a great day at Trinity. We've got a team of people who are on a mission trip to Guatemala, Mark and others that we blessed last week. And as Diana said, we're hosting a licensing school with candidates for ministry, feeling called to ordained ministry. They've come here, we're hosting it. It's an important part of their ministry, and when they look back, they'll remember a place called Trinity that held them, hosted them, taught them, nurtured them, and loved them as well. So good work, church. And we look forward to a great week ahead with the children and their mission projects as well with Camp Can Do. If you would, let's just bow our heads. God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. There's a lost art. It's called the art of writing a letter. Some of you have not done that in a long time. Some of you have never done that. You look at the world we live in today, it's this disposable communication. It's Twitter and text and emails and Facebook and Messenger, and they're generally pretty forgettable and unremarkable for the most part. It's a good bet you're not going to wait 20 years from now and open up a drawer to pull out an old email that somebody had sent you. You're not going to look around for the thumbs up emoji somebody gave to you one day, but letters are different. Letters we actually preserve, but it's a lost art. Seemingly our culture either has forgotten or moved on to the art of writing a good letter. So if you're under the age of 30, haven't done it in a while, or have never done it, let me explain to you. This is an envelope. Inside is a letter that you write and sign it. You put it in the envelope and you seal it. In the envelope, you put the address in the center, then you put a stamp in the corner. Stamp is actually something you have to have in order to mail it. Stamp is something you buy at a post office. A post office, if you don't know, it's a brown, okay, you already know this, and if you don't know it, just look it up, okay? It's a lost art, but we're starting a series called The Letter That We Need to Write, and that is so true. There's a letter that we need to write, somebody who actually needs to receive it, if possible. Because stored away in your house somewhere is probably a box full of letters you kept preserved, because you knew how important they were. They're timeless. And when you open them up, you almost go back into time to a different place, and they mean so much to you, and you hold on and preserve it. Letters are incredibly powerful. In fact, the whole New Testament, much of it is based upon letters. Paul writes 13 letters. There's other letters that make up the New Testament. He sends them to churches, to individuals, to little communities of faith in order to help them understand what they need. Sometimes he's dealing with a conflict. Sometimes he's trying to give information because there's been so much misinformation giving, people trying to mislead them. Or he's trying to help them understand what it means to live into a Christ-like faith. And he writes these letters. You can imagine the people who anticipate receiving a letter that somebody announces, we've got a letter. We got another letter from Paul. And they gather around these little faith communities and they open it up and they read it and they treasure it. The words that are offered, and they keep it, they hold it, preserve it, they hand it down from generation to generation. That's the power of a letter. Paul also says something I think is remarkable. In 2 Corinthians, you yourselves are an actual letter from Christ, not written on a tablet of stone, but written on the human heart. I mean, he said that. He said, we're actually a letter of Christ to other people, meaning whatever we say is a reflection of what we believe and who we are, and sometimes we forget it's the message sent. It's what we're statements trying to make by our actions, by our words, that we're actually a letter that other people read. And what do they actually see in us, and what do they hear from us, if that is really true? So I'm convinced there's a letter that we need to write. And so you have a little insert in your bulletin that talks about where we're headed. And we're going to start with the easiest one because they get hard. And this is not a gosh, come and see kind of sermon series. It's a go and do sermon series. I want to invite you, and you may choose, rightfully so, not to write certain letters. Maybe it's to somebody who's really hurt you deeply that you feel like it's wiser not to do it. Also, a letter to those who are no longer with us. You can't send it to them, but I would encourage you to write. I would encourage you to sit down, because what it does is force you to sit down and think about deeply what you want to say, and to craft the narrative and the sentences and to structure the words in such a way it conveys exactly what you want to say. So a letter to a friend is where we begin, but we're going to go eventually to all kinds of different letters. In the series, it's going to talk about sending a letter to someone who's hurt us deeply, or to a person that we love that's no longer with us, or maybe a letter to our parents, or maybe a letter to our children, a letter to ourselves, finally a letter to God. If you begin to think about it, it's not as easy as you think. I would invite you to do just that. There is this wonderful image that some of you have seen, and I've always appreciated this. I want to put it up on the screen and let you take a look at it. So it says, if Paul saw the church in America, we'd all be getting a letter. Boy, is that not true? I mean, if God saw some of the ridiculous things that are happening in churches these days, we'd all get a letter. Every single one of us would get a letter. He'd be really concerned about what's happening, what's going on. That's another sermon for another day, and it's probably a really good sermon for another day. What we're talking about is letters, letters to individuals, letters to people who have made an impact upon our life. Letters are at the heart of the Bible, 13 different ones talking about all the things that really matter in the community of faith. Because there's something powerful about a letter that you preserve it, you hold it, you keep it, because you know it contains something that's timeless and eternal. And you know it stands the test of time. You hold on to it because it marks something that you want to hold on to and preserve. Let me give you an example of a letter. 19th Amendment, 1920, was the movement to give women the right to vote. It came down to a very close call. Tennessee was asked to ratify it. If Tennessee doesn't approve it, the 19th Amendment doesn't pass. It comes down to one Harry Byrne, who's 24 years old, and he has been an outspoken critic of the 19th Amendment. And everybody who shows up on the day to vote wears a red rose on their lapel to signify they are against the 19th Amendment. They will vote against it. Harry Byrne just does exactly that. He's 24 years old. When they call the roll call to vote, something incredible happens, because he has a red rose to say to everybody, I'm going to vote against it. Problem is, he has a letter inside his jacket. It's from his mother, who's very much in favor of the 19th Amendment. And she tells him all the reasons why she wants him to vote for the 19th Amendment. And she ends it, and I love it. And remember, be a good boy and vote for it. The 19th Amendment passes. Power in a letter. It's an incredible sense of what it can convey. This is long, but I want you to hear this. You haven't heard this before. I think it's remarkable. Came across it in the PBS documentary series on the Civil War. Sullivan Ballou was part of the Rhode Island militia preparing for the first battle of Bull Run. He had this premonition he wasn't going to make it. He knew the stakes were high. He knew the danger was real. And he sits down to write a letter to his wife, Sarah. I don't normally read long. I want you to hear this, and I want you to contrast it with this sort of disposable communication with the craft and art of writing a letter that only a letter and a truth can convey. He sits down and pens this. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all those chains to the battlefield. Memories of all the blissful moments I've spent with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I have enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to the ashes the hopes of future years when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together, seeing our boys grow up to honorable manhood around us. I know I have but few claims upon divine providence, but something whispers to me, perhaps it is the wafted prayer of little Edgar, that I shall return to my loved ones unharmed. If I do not, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults, the many pains I've caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I've often been. How gladly would I wash out with my tears every little spot upon your happiness and struggle with all the misfortune of this world to shield you and my children from harm. But I cannot. I must watch you from the spirit land and hover near you while you buffet the storms with your precious little freight, and with sad patience till we meet to part no more. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen with those they loved, I shall be near you in the garish day and the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and your gloomiest hours, always, always. And if the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath. Or the cool air cools your throbbing temples, it shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me, dear. Think I am gone, and wait for me, for we shall meet again. 1 week later, Sullivan Ballou was killed in battle. There's an art to writing a letter I've shared with you. I have 2 adopted kids every year on their birthday. They get a letter from me. It's generally the same letter. They're in their 30s now. It doesn't matter. And I suspect some days when they get the letter, they just roll their eyes. Oh, yeah, it's another letter. We get one every year. But what I want them to know is one of these days when I'm gone, I want them to know how much they're loved and what a blessing they have been and how much I believe in them and care for them. I don't want anything left unsaid or undone. I talk to a lot of people, and it occurs to me there are 2 things that come up if you live long enough. One is unresolved pain. The other is unfinished business. This feeling that we didn't do what we should have done. We didn't say what we should have said. And there's just feeling of remorse and regret. Spoke to a lady last week, had a difficult relationship with her brother, suffered from mental illness. He did. Tragically, he took his life. And she was met with this burden that the moment he left this world, it ended the possibility they could reconcile before he did. And she had this incredible burden of feeling that somehow all the unreconciled things weren't going to get reconciled. The unfinished business wasn't going to get finished. And part of the good news and the hope of the gospel is to say God always has the last word, that no matter what the chapter is at the end, God can write a new chapter that you can begin. Even if you can't change the past, you can write a new future. You can write a better story and a better ending as well. I think we live with a sense of regret, remorse. We all have falling out, relationships that are broken, people that we were once close to. We drift away or we pull away. And we have this sort of distance and we don't know what to do with it, and we hope that someday we can reconcile it. But here's the mistake. We always think we have enough time and we assume way too much. We convince ourselves there's always going to be time. I don't know about you. I don't want to try to put fear into you. There are no guarantees of anything except the day that we're given. And so we always think we're going to have time until the day in which we realize we didn't have any more time and we didn't do what we always wanted to do, or we assume too much, meaning, well, surely they know how we feel. We don't have to actually tell them, which is a mistake. So we go to a story about Ruth. And Ruth is such an ordinary story. There's no miracles in the book of Ruth, no parting of the Red Sea, no supernatural events, just people that are struggling through a really hard time. Ruth is not rich. She doesn't have any positions of power. And so you look at this story and you say, well, so what? What does this have to do with us? What can this teach us about our own lives? And I'll tell you what I think it is. It's a story about deep and genuine friendship. I hear this quoted every once in a while at weddings. It's not about a wedding. It's about people who really struggle, who when everything falls apart, you find out who your real friends are. And that's the story of Ruth and Naomi. So if you want to know about friendship, most of us can count the number of friends we have on one hand. If you have 50 or 60 friends, you're incredibly blessed. Most people are really fortunate to have 3 or 4 or 5 really good friends. I check my Facebook. I don't know why I never go on there that much. I've got 1,100 friends. How many of those do you think will come running at 2 in the morning if I need them? It's what I want for church, because church still represents to me the one place in the world where you can drop your guard and say, I'm not doing really well and I need somebody who will help me. And you become a friend to somebody. You don't have to pretend to be anybody else. You don't have to put on a smiling face and just plow through everything. You can actually be a friend. That's what a friend is. They know you. And you don't have to pretend to be anything that you're not. And a friend, especially in time of adversity, is the one who's always going to stay with you, stick with you, believe in you, and encourage you. And a friend knows you, knows everything about you because you've had so many shared experiences, the memories that you've made. And somehow a lot of it's been forged in difficult times when you really want to know who your friends are, when your life begins to unravel, see who shows up. Maybe Jesus gives the highest compliment to his own disciples, and you'd hear the transition. In John 15, no longer do I call you servants, he says, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I call you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. When Jesus makes a transition, saying it's the highest order, you're not just a servant who will do exactly what I tell you to do. You're a friend who wants to do the best for me and for others as well. So this is the worst of times for Ruth and Naomi in particular. There's a famine in the land. They go to Moab just to find food to sustain. She takes her husband, 2 sons. 10 years later, her 2 sons marry foreigners, Moabite women. But then it really begins to fall apart. The 2 sons die and her own husband dies. Naomi literally is translated to bitter. She thinks the world has gone against her, that God is no longer present in her life. And so all she has is 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And she wants them to have their own life. She's going to go back home, and she doesn't have anything waiting for her anymore. But they're still young. She wants them to have their own life. And so she encourages both of them to go back to Moab, back to their family, back to their home, and both of them began to. Orpah goes. But it's Ruth, and Ruth is the one who pledges. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God, meaning I'm not leaving you. I'm going to stay with you because you need me and I need you. So who are the people who stuck with you, stayed with you, never turned their backs on you, never gave up on you? And if you just close your eyes for a moment, you can actually look and see their name, and you can see their face, and you know exactly who they are, because every time you were in need, they showed up. Every time you were empty, they came to fill you up. I knew a man who had literally lost millions of dollars, spectacular, came from nothing, got insanely rich, and then lost it all. He was so humiliated, he just went into his house, closed his door, sat in a dark room, wouldn't talk to anybody. People tried to call him, reach out. He didn't want to talk with anybody, didn't want to deal with anyone. There was a person who knew him for 40 or 50 years, knew him when he was poor, and he went over and banged on his door. The person who had lost everything would not open the door, and finally, my friend Bill said, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to keep banging on this door because I know you're in here, and I'm not leaving until you open this door. Because I knew you when you were poor, I knew you when you had millions of dollars, and it was never about the money. I'm your friend, and I want to help you. And then the door opened, and it opened to a new life and a new journey. Who are the people that really do know you, stayed with you, never turned their backs up on you, never gave up on you? And here's my invitation to you, write them a letter. And don't assume they already know how you feel. And don't wait too long, because you never know how much time you have. And I would suggest this, not only do they need to hear it, you need to write it, because there's something about this sense of closure to say, before my life is over, I want to say what needs to be said. I want to do what needs to be done. Part of the dilemma when you get to the end of your life and you stop and you think, did I ever do anything good for anybody? Did I ever make a difference in anybody's life? And if you look down and you see a stack of letters from people who took the time to tell you what they meant and what you meant to them, and incredibly how you changed their lives, that you could go and leave this world in such peace. So I told you about this story from Ruth and Naomi, and it's about the heart of genuine friendship and the kind of friendship that never gives up on you, kind of friendship that stays with you. So ironically, how do we know about this story of Ruth? Because somebody looked and saw a model of what real friendship is and wanted to make sure they preserved it. And so they wrote it, and they set it down in writing, and they preserved it, and they shared it with other people. And they gave it to one generation who gave it to another generation, which means even thousands of years later, we get to sit down and read something because somebody felt like it was that important and rooted. There's a letter that needs to be written. And now you know what the story of Ruth is about. To take the time to remember what real friendship means. Because there are people in your life that saved you, that at your lowest moment loved you back to life. And now you know Ruth's story, and in part you know your story. And as Jesus would say, go and do likewise.